Hey, what's up guys? Back in the shop and a quick little video about how to swap your cassette. So this is a really easy process anyone can do. You just need a couple of tools to do it. But I'm going to show you kind of how it works first. So what I'm doing is I'm taking taking a cassette off of my race wheels here, and I'm going to throw them back on my training wheels here. Now these training wheels I had set up as just a spare set that I put in the wheel pit, and I've already removed the cassette off of that. So this is a spare cassette that I was using. But that is my primary cassette that I train and race with. So I like to keep the same chain with the same cassette because it's typically changing cassettes wear at the same rate. So this is just kind of a backup. But I want to show you a couple of things. So when it comes off, it usually comes off in multiple pieces. Today there are some unibody cassettes that are all attached. In this particular situation, the biggest three gears, meaning the easiest three gears, are all a single body, and then all the rest come separate. So what I did is I just put a zip tie around it so it keeps everything in the same direction, so I don't have to think about which way it was flipped. To that point, there are some spacers in here between each of the gears, and so you want to make sure that you kind of keep everything in order. The other thing too is you want to make sure that you don't, if you take them off in individual pieces, make sure you don't put one on backwards. Typically how you can tell, let's see if we can see, if I can show you. So like there's a little bit of writing there that kind of shows you the gear tooth count. And then also sometimes it says, 11S for 11 speed or whatever it may be. But typically the writing faces outward, so that's a good way to think about it. And if you look on the back of this, there's no writing on the back, and it's relatively flat. The side that faces outwards typically has a little bit of a curvature to it within each gear, so you can look at that too. The other thing too, and as you look at, let's look at this is called a free hub, so this is what the cassette mounts to, obviously. And then as you look at this, look at the size of the splines, and they're all about the same size except for this one little spline right here, which is thinner than all the rest. Now, when you put your cassette on, let's see if I can show you this. So look at the spacing here, and then look at that little guy. So that little space lines up with the little spline on the cassette, and that's how you know your cassette is aligned properly. So I just wanted to kind of show you what that looks like. The other thing too here is look at, this wheel is a couple years old, so look at these little grooves that have notched their way in there. That's called pitting, and that's very normal. As long as you don't have play in the cassette, meaning the cassette is moving about freely on the free hub body. And when you'd feel that when you pedal, it would just kind of feel kind of loose. A little bit of pitting is okay, and nothing to be concerned about. If it gets really bad, and this is actually getting kind of bad, but it's still fine. If it gets really bad, you just need to replace that free hub body. You don't have to replace the whole wheel. And that's beyond the scope of this video. Not going to show you that today, but wanted to show you a few of those things. Oh, here too. So this is how everything, this is the outer lock ring, and this is how everything is attached. And I'm going to show you how that works now. That keeps everything compressed against the cassette body. Now, to remove, so this is the cassette installed on the bike, and this is the lock ring that keeps everything tight towards the rim. And you can look at the little grooves here. So let's see if I can show you that better. There you go. So see those little grooves in there? So this is called a cassette tool. And as you can imagine, it just sticks right in there. And these come in different shapes and sizes. This one in particular has this little adapter so I can put an Allen wrench in it. And there is my cassette tool right there, okay? Easy to use. This is called a chain whip. Now the reason the chain whip is important, because if you have, this is the lock ring, and what we want to do is unscrew it counterclockwise. But the problem with that is when you turn it counterclockwise, the cassette turns, right? So that's what the chain whip is for. So the chain whip just goes on like so, and just hooks onto some of the cassette teeth, and the cassette tool slides right in those grooves. And then I just rotate counterclockwise, and that's it. Now, sometimes the lock rings by specs are supposed to be tightened down to 40 Newton meters, which is really, really tight. And I've never tightened down a cassette that tight because I think that's unnecessary, because there isn't any leverage on the lock ring. It just needs to keep everything compressed. So I give it a good wrist tight because that makes it a little bit easier to come apart, and I don't have to really crank it down. So I just stuck the cassette tool back in there, and now that lock ring is loose. And if you're lucky, you can get the whole cassette off without taking them. So I'm squeezing it together because they're loose except for those back three that I pointed out to you. And I'm going to take this and try and put it right back on the rim So I'm noting where that little spline is. And I gotta find it. There it is. So I'm gonna orient it so that little spline goes in the little gap. And then if you're lucky again, everything slides into place without having to take each individual piece apart. Now, if it comes apart, it's not a big deal. You just kind of feed them on one at a time, keeping in mind the various spacers that you had in place, and keep those in the same fashion that you took them off. So pay attention when you're taking things off that you put it back in the same orientation that you, put it back on the same orientation that you took it off. So now, all the cassettes on there. Now I need a handful of turns on this to fully engage so that there is appropriate tension on the lock ring. So everything's on there. Now what I'm going to do is stick the cassette tool in there. I'm going to backspin it until I just hear a little click to make sure it doesn't cross thread. And there it is. So I got a little click. And I got about 3 or 4 good turns, probably 2 full turns, maybe 3, but that's good engagement. And then I'm just tightening it down. I would say maybe a good elbow tight. So not really 40 Newton meters. 40 Newton meters is a lot of pressure. You don't need that much. Just enough to keep it in place, but not so hard that it's impossible to get back off again. And then I'm feeling for any lateral play to make sure it's tight enough. It is. There is no lateral play there. And so that is the cassette reinstalled. Okay? And that's all there is to it. Now, the other piece is if you have a 10 or 11 speed, if you have a 10 and 11 speed compatible wheel like this one is, but you're using a 10 speed cassette. So for example, my time trial bike is a handful of years old and it's still a 10 speed setup. So if I use these wheels with a 10 speed cassette, I need a spacer because the spacing is different 10 speed to 11 speed. So what I just flipped over was an 11 speed cassette onto a 10 and 11 speed compatible wheel. So I don't need any spacers, but if I put a 10 speed cassette on here as if I was doing a time trial for my time trial bike, I need a 1.75 millimeter spacer that goes behind the cassette. And again, this one actually has notches on it, so it needs to orient. And it's being a little difficult on me. Let me find the right hole here. There it is. Good grief. There we go. So I just had to find the right orientation, and then the spacer goes behind. Now, if I was putting my 10-speed cassette on here, now I can put my 10-speed cassette on in the same fashion that I just showed you. That's the only real difference. I can't really speak to 12-speed right now because I don't have a 12-speed system, but that is cassette installation for either a 10 or 11-speed cassette on a 10 and 11-speed compatible wheel. All right, that's it. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks, guys.